All right, good evening, everyone. I'm Kara Carmack, the Assistant Director of Exhibitions and Public Programs at the New York Studio School, and I'm honored to welcome you to our Spring 2024 Evening Lecture Series. We're delighted to host tonight's conversation between curator Brooke Kamin Rapaport and artist Rose B. Simpson in anticipation of Simpson's upcoming site-responsive installations on the grounds of Madison Square Park and Inwood Hill Park, commissioned by Madison Square Park Conservancy. Entitled Seed, they will be on view from April 11th through September 22nd, 2024. We'll reserve time at the end for a Q&A with the audience. Please submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen at any time throughout the conversation. The New York Studio School is grateful to the following funders for their support of the 2023-24 Evening Lecture Series: the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York State Council on the Arts, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, the Robert Lehman Foundation, the Samuel H. Kress Foundation, and many generous individual contributors. Please visit our website to learn more or to make a donation to help keep programs like our evening lecture series free. Now I'm delighted to introduce our guest this evening. Born in Santa Clara, Pueblo, New Mexico, where she currently lives and works, Rose B. Simpson has had solo exhibitions at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston, the Nevada Art Museum in Reno, Wheelwright Museum, Santa Fe, and Savannah College of Art and Design Museum of Art. Her work is in the collections of the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Denver Art Museum, the Hood Museum of Art, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Nevada Art Museum in Reno, the Benton Museum of Art at Pomona College, Claremont, Portland Art Museum, Princeton University Art Museum, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. She's among the artists featured in the 2024 Whitney Biennial, opening March 20th, 2024. She's the recipient of the Ruth Foundation for the Arts Award, also in 2024. Brooke Kamin Rapaport is the artistic director and Martin Friedman chief curator of the Madison Square Park Conservancy. Since joining the Conservancy in 2013, Rapaport has organized and overseen its program of commissioned public art exhibitions, including projects by Diana Al-Hadid, Leonardo Drew, Teresita Fernandez, Hugh Hayden, Maya Lin, and Shazia Sikander. In 2019, she served as commissioner and curator of the U.S. Pavilion at the Venice Biennale, showcasing artist Martin Puryear. Rapaport has previously held positions at the Brooklyn Museum, the Jewish Museum, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. So thank you, Rose and Brooke, for being here with us tonight, and I'll now turn it over to you.
Many thanks, Kara.
Thank you, Kara.
We're so thrilled to be here with your audience, and very honored that Rose is joining us from New Mexico. Rose is going to share remarks for about a half an hour, and then she and I will engage in questions and answers, and then, as you said, we'll open it up to all of those listeners out there.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, everyone, for coming and joining us this evening. I'm going to talk a little bit about my work and share some photos, and then we can chat. Let's see. Okay, can you see it? Are we good?
Perfect.
Awesome. So my practice has always been about finding my way. I grew up in Santa Clara, Pueblo in New Mexico, and by local kid. My parents were separated. I spent time with my dad in Santa Fe, but most of my time with my mom here in Santa Clara. And she was really interested in permaculture and cultural preservation. Permaculture being the study of sustainable living systems. And in permaculture, one of the main studies is pattern understanding and how the patterns of the world and your your place in the natural ecosystems or ecosystems of community, of society, of our natural world, and how you can be aware of those patterns and your place in them, and then how to be more efficient and sustainable within those patterns. And so I was always caught by, how we're in relation to the world around us, not just physically, environmentally, also spiritually and psychologically. And this photo here is from my installation at the Fabric Workshop and Museum in Philadelphia, where we made, I think there was like 80 paper bowls that I painted with these stars, and we hung them from this ceiling. And I've always thought about my work as understanding the patterns of our relationships to ourselves and the world around us. I was given clay as a very young kid from my matrilineal line. My mother, my grandma, my great grandma, most people in my family were clay workers in the Pueblo. And I always saw clay and a relationship to clay as it's not inanimate, right? So it is this being that is alive. This picture on the right, I walked over to my mom's house one day, and she was making these pots, and they were laying on the ground. And I was like, there it is. They're breathing, and they're whole. They're full of intention. They're full of life. They're full of giving. They're full of nurturing. And in my work is hollow. My clay work is hollow in this way. It holds that intention. It breathes. It has those openings where it can it has life and shares life and is of this world just like we are. And it's a step to de-objectifying the world around us and building relationship with all things around us by listening to them and allowing them to have something to say. And so when I build my work, it is often my own investigation into subjects that are about context and about myself in context. So this piece on the left is about it was about the Indian boarding schools and the genocidal construct of assimilation of Native peoples. And as a descendant of boarding school children, I navigate sort of the descendants of trauma, right? And that I inherited from that. And I'm trying to undo that. And also, how do we identify that trauma and also find compassion and camaraderie through that experience itself. And that was what that work was about. So it was about finding that process and relationship to that historical experience within myself. And the piece on the right has to do with identity in the context of navigating the world that we're in now, of colonization and post-colonial stress disorder, etc. And hoping that by looking inside myself for these images and these figures, that as I express them and manifest them, that they actually affect others as well, and people can find themselves in it. So this piece is called Counterculture, and this is 12 originally it was 12 pieces that were installed the field farm in Massachusetts. And it the concept was that we are deconstructing the objectification of others, right? And that when we remember that we're being watched constantly, then how do we be in the world that we're constantly in relationship and constantly in responsibility and accountability? So these works were intentionally about creating a physical manifestation of that experience of being in relationship to place and space. And so these become these layers of me looking at myself and how I am in relationship. I want to look at something, witness it, and then allow it to move me and change me and see a part of myself in a way that I hadn't before. The piece on the left is at the Denver Art Museum. And I've always thought about our relationship to ourselves. And when we are in a healthy relationship to self, then we are in a more conscious and aware and informed relationship to the world around us. And oftentimes in my work, I will include small beings like young people or babies, and oftentimes they represent relationship to family, to children and offspring, but also to oneself. And how do we do this work that we can uplift certain parts of ourselves to get better perspectives, or to hold or protect or become embodied empowerment? And what does that look like? And oftentimes my work doesn't have arms, and that's intentional, as my life goal is more to be in a space of conscious being rather than doing, because most of my self-worth is based on what I can do and accomplish and my capabilities. And so that's one thing that I've used to reflect another type of empowerment. I've looked at the vessel in lots of ways. And this is Maria. She's a 1985 Chevy El Camino. And she is one of my long-term projects in relationship to an object and de-objectifying this being. She is such a being. And we have a relationship, and it's not always nice. We sometimes fight. She is an incredible reflection of empowerment. And she's painted. She's the closest I've ever come to traditional pottery, because she's painted in the traditional manner of my area. So the black on black, where the pottery was originally painted, polished, highly polished, and then painted with a slip to delete that polish. And then it was fired in a carbon reduction to make the surface a deep, deep black. And in that black, it's very subtle black on black. And I figured out, I went to school in auto body and collision repair, auto body lowrider design, and to do paint and body. And this is where I discovered this process. And this car has been a performance piece, as I really feel that as we move through the world, our decisions become intentional. Like if we're intentional with our navigating of our environment, then we are constantly in a state of aesthetic experience, aesthetic awareness, a deep information that we're deeply absorbing information, and then creating informed and decisions on how we proceed. And that's always changing. And I really feel like this was a photo that was taken in like 2015 of a performance that I call Transformance, where when you have this intentional embodied experience, it actually changes you, and not necessarily trying to change anyone else, but this intention to become a stronger being through intentional experience. And so I often create this work, these breathing vessels of intention, to reflect to myself my values. And in those values, I am very intentional with the story that I'm telling myself and I'm telling the world around me. So something about reincarnation and this thinking about how we are linked sort of timelessly throughout relationship to culture, through the experience of being a human in this world. And then how do we carry those marks and be intentional with those marks? So every single piece I do has these I usually use raw clay as the colorant, but then I'll use sparse amounts of glaze to put certain design work and patterns that have very intentional meaning. So like this one, the star is on the throat, and it's about, for me, that moment when I put that star on her throat, I was creating the truth in the world that she was guided in her voice, and how she spoke and what she was going out in the world to say would be guided. And this piece, intentionally was out there to make change. It was a prayer for change, and that star will help that truth become real. In my life, I have, changed. I hope to always be changing, but one of the things that has changed the most, I think, from becoming a parent has been what empowerment looks like. And it used to be, I think, more masculine. And as I became a mother, I grew a child in my body, and I'm learning how to love in a whole new way. That empowerment looks a little bit more tender and about the way we carry ourselves, rather than what kind of empowered objects or almost like weapons that we carry. So I've been really fascinated in the power of the aesthetic moments of adornment. And so these pieces are about empowering oneself with sort of a tenderness or a grace. And this is obviously something I look for in my own life, because I'm trying to understand it for myself, as someone who has struggled with my self-worth and the way that I express myself. And also, as the world itself is our aesthetic experience, and the choices that we make represent our empowerment in that world, I'm looking at how those change for me, and how they evolve, and how they grow and become more healthy in ways, right? And how do we honor the resources in our lives, and in defining the aesthetic in that, we are co-creating the world that we want or we desire. Whether it's a higher understanding, where we're building new understanding through education, through relationship, through letting go in order to build a practice of self-awareness or consciousness in a different way, or the empowerment of how we are aware of the way that we are in charge of our world, and how we de-victimize ourselves. And I feel like one of my main processes in my life is to understand how to release the victimry that I have felt very strongly. And I don't think I'm alone in that. And so I feel like as I work through that, hopefully it changes things for the world around me as well. The piece on the left was made for a show that I had at Jack Shaman Gallery last spring. And I was thinking a lot about how we're not alone in our life path, and what does that look like, and how do you show that in an empowered way. And then on the right, I was really wanting to make a piece that demonstrated what I prayed for in terms of peace and rest and self-awareness, and that deep letting be that I think every overdoer looks for in life. And I start every piece with a drawing, and this drawing was quite small in my sketchbook, and then when I started building it, it just got taller and taller, and this piece I believe is around 8 feet or almost 9 feet tall. It's pretty high up there. And I always thought, I guess I really need to let go. And the piece was trying to tell me how important that was. And it's interesting to think about scale too, because I've spent my life sort of navigating what scale is, and how when we look at the anthropomorphic form that's on the same ground as we are, there's ideally empathic response that is deeper than, say, if we're looking down at something or if we're looking up at something. And I've been looking for ways to find how to mold that experience differently. And recently my work has been quite large, by way of clay, and also going into other materials. Obviously now I'm working with some bigger scales, and also the idea of clay being quite large and it's fragile, etc. So it's an interesting process, and I'm finding out about it with myself. When I went to RISD, I went to graduate school through Rhode Island School of Design and Ceramics, and one of the reasons I chose to go there was because they had these massive kilns. And by the time I left, I was using their 8-inch test kiln and making some of the most powerful work that I had experienced for myself. And that was a really incredible experience. This is also from the show at Jack Shaman, and this one is steel. This is an example of using steel in my work. So this is a clay being that's surrounded by steel stars, and it's in the universe. It's all I often think about when I get worried about things or stressing about things. It's like, look up and observe the contextual field, and we're tiny in this world, and we're also huge in it, and we're part of it, and we're also nothing. And how we can remember our context, and in remembering that we find ourselves at peace. But I also, because I worked in cars, I worked in lots of different materials. The counterculture pieces were originally carved with a chainsaw out of wood. And even though I feel really blessed that I have this strong relationship with clay and will return to it, my relationship with metal is also important to me. And just to wrap up, I think a lot about the consequences of our actions and how we are in a state of balance with the future generations, and we're holding this idea of what can be. And in that prayer for what can be, we have to be in this really delicate balance. And this is a piece that represents that delicate balance. We're also in deep relationship, and the ones that we choose to bring around us reflect us. I recently made a series of pieces that were portraits of some of the dearest people in my life. And that was an incredible process because I had to dig deep and to find my love for these people. And what does that love look like? And then represent that love itself. So it's not like a physical portrait of them, it's a portrait of my love for them and what I see in them that's empowered. And that as they look at me, as they look at each other, as we witness each other, we grow and we know ourselves and we remember who we are and how important our community is. And in that, so the piece on the right was one of the most vulnerable pieces I've made of late. These were for a show at Jessica Silverman Gallery that I did in November. And the piece on the right was the first like real self-portrait I made in a really long time. And it was really scary to make, and it took me a really long time. And it has this small person lashed to its chest. And the small person isn't just a child, it is the self, because there is the witnessing, being, not doing self, and then there's the heart's desire. And what does that look like? I'm holding on to my heart's desire and working to make a plan or to figure out how I can create that truth for my little heart's desire. And that is the piece called Two Selves on the right. And on the left, there's also a piece I made for Jessica Silverman's solo I did in November. And it has these clay plates up on a steel frame, and it's about how we close our eyes and listen with the other parts of ourselves. And that is a super, super important thing for me. I'm always figuring out other ways to listen, because I feel like we haven't been really taught how to listen. Can we close our eyes and listen, close our ears and listen, listen to the sound of energies, the sound of things that we didn't even know had a resonance. And in that, we learn so much about ourselves, we learn so much about our world, and we open ourselves to so much more than we ever could have thought possible. And that is, in a sense, like my space of prayer is actually just wonder, and that listening and that soaking in. And that to me has been one of the most amazing things. And so in order to grant my heart, my little heart's desire, I have to stay in a state of reception, so that I can find the road through myself, through this life, through my perception, through releasing all the judgments that keep me caged up and limited and small, and allow me to be beyond more than what I could imagine. And in that process of looking for that in myself, and almost documenting this journey through my work, that I am praying that the world around me can find their way to. And I have no idea what other people need, but this is what I'm doing, and maybe it can help other people find their way through it too. So I believe that is my last slide, and so I'm gonna stop and we can return. Are we here?
We're here. Can you turn on your, there you go. Hi.
Hi.
Rose, oh my gosh, thank you. It's such a stunning body of work, and it navigates and brings us through personal and collective environments and experiences and awareness and histories all through the figure. We should let people know that you're creating a project in Madison Square Park and in Woodhill Park that's going to open on April 11th, 2024. In Madison Square Park, the project is called Seed. In Madison Square Park, you're constructing 7 towering sentinels, 18 feet high, and they will surround a female figure who emerges from the ground plane. She's in bronze. And in Inwood Hill Park, you are bringing 2 bronze sentinels, 8 feet high, a pair of works that will take a very important place in that park. You started your remarks by talking about how your practice has always been about finding your way. And I remember when you first set foot in Madison Square Park, you found your way by walking around the site pretty extensively and looking at the architecture and at the trees, but also at the tens of people, hundreds of people who were there crossing those pathways. So I want to start and ask you, how did 2 Manhattan sites, Madison Square Park and Inwood Hill Park, inspire your sculpture and its placement and viewers? And when you were creating Seed, and when you considered these public spaces of parkland in New York City, did you think about not only the land, but also the tens of thousands of people who are in those parks every day? And did that become a partner in a sense?
I think that when I'm making something for a place, I have to visit. I have to be there. It's difficult for me to listen from far away, and I feel like I am always in collaboration with something else, right? So when I was walking through the park, I was asking, what do you need here? What do you want to say? And I asked the place, tell me what I need to make. What do you use me as your tool to communicate something? What is that? And it comes really fast. It's very clear. It's like, oh, this is what needs to happen. And then my job is to figure out how to engineer that and to like turn it into, you know, a visual metaphor, right? For what I was told. And so, yes, it's a collaboration with the place, right? And the place is not just a little square, not so little, but you know, a little square in a metropolis. It's also a place that so many people through time have had relationship with and have co-created the consciousness that is the park, that is that place, right? And it has a history, a deep, deep history, and it also has an incredibly multifaceted relational machine in a sense, right? And how do you listen to that and try and digest what you've been told in order to create something that can speak for and with and on behalf of, and also, you know, and so I think that most of my job is just to listen and then collaborate in that regard.
And when you were thinking about the scale of those works, it was very important to you that you work in steel, and that was the material that you thought was a powerful material for New York City, for this site, and then in bronze in Wood Hill. But what's remarkable is the economy of means, that expression that we use about how you wanted to take up through these figures every inch of that sheet, that 10-foot tall sheet of steel, and use every inch of that when you were drawing the figures initially. And then if there were scraps, those would become surface embellishments. Can you describe that process a little bit, talk that through for us?
Because of my my history, my growing up in a permaculture environment, I'm hyper aware of the environmental impact of art making, right? And so I often think about like how can you show the most respect to the material itself by like utilizing its energetic properties as thoroughly as possible so that it actually makes the most, you know, lack of bang for your buck, right? So the energy itself of that steel, I wanted to be like, we don't need to be in excess, because, you know, how do you make something that's monumental and be still conscious of excess, right? And so the whole piece was designed around using the material thoroughly and respectfully and consciously, right? So how can we make something that holds its own in this city, right? New York City, there's nowhere else like it, right? Something that holds its own in a really empowered state and also communicates efficiency and sustainability and consciousness of our resources. Our resources are not just our food, but our energetic resources in the life we live, right? So how do we just engage with that conversation as well with the work, you know? And I'm always thinking about my environmental the environmental impact of my art making, and what am I consuming in order to speak. I always question, who am I to use these resources? And I question, and some of my silent questions that are energetic feelings of places is like, teach me how to speak best for you, Earth, speak best for you metal, speak best for you wood. And maybe in my reverence for the material itself and the consciousness of its extraction and production, that I can bring consciousness to the extraction and production of these materials to the world and actually make a little bit more awareness in the world of that relationship.
Right. Amazing. I mean, I think that certainly that's evident in the work, and that will be when people see these works. I think that's there, significant.
It'll be fun to figure out like which piece fits with the other one.
Exactly. You and I have spoken a lot about ideas around shared Native experience and shared human experience. And I want to ask you, do you feel that the art world or even the world has an expectation that your sculpture should provide ideas around Native identities, Native experiences, and shared human experiences? And it's what you have brought up the ideas, the question of, is there an obligation? Is there a sense of responsibility that you feel around tribal identities?
There was a time in my life where I wanted to be seen as an artist and not as a Native artist.
Right.
That was really important to me. And I was actually turning down opportunities because it was only for Native people, because I felt pigeonholed, and I felt in a sense that my voice was objectified and exotified and not allowed to be part of sort of the human experience. And I think going to graduate school really helped, because I wanted to be seen as, a person and not as my cultural identity necessarily. But I also realized that my cultural identity and my relationship to where I grew up, where I continue to participate and live, is actually something, and it's different than a lot of people's experience, right? And that does inherently inform what I make and who I am. And that's okay. But that also makes it challenging for me to navigate some of those difficult conversations, right? Because when I have the kind of access, that kind of voice, like being able to have my work at Madison Square Park, there is a responsibility to my communities, my tribal communities, and also because what I do affects the people around me, affects the world I live in. And so I have to consider those things with everything I make. I still live in a community. I still live in a family. I still am held accountable to my actions, that I represent a larger group of people and not just myself. And that's something I often think about, but I also feel like I'm a visitor in New York too, right? So my ancestral homelands are in the Four Corners area of the Southwest, right? So this is my ancestral homeland is here in the high desert. It's not Lenapehoking, right? I am a visitor, and I am not an indigenous person of that area, right? I don't have ancestral ties to that land. And so I hope that, because I know how I would like people to approach my homelands, because I can empathize with the feeling of having people on my ancestral homelands, that maybe I can figure out how to demonstrate a way to approach. And I will make mistakes. We will all make mistakes, right? But because of my awareness of how I would want people to approach my ancestral homelands, then I have that much more information on how to approach this homelands, right? As a visitor.
Right.
And I also feel like, is it my job as a Native person to do that work, right? Like every single artist that shows up at Madison Square Park also needs to consider that they're a visitor on someone's ancestral homelands. Right. And that everywhere we go, in a sense, we are a guest. And how do we act as a guest in a world where entitlement is more important than respect and accountability, responsibility, and reverence, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe just simply because I have a empathic awareness of what that might feel like, that I can begin to try and understand that. But we're also navigating an art world, a metropolitan world, an entirely colonized existence that does not work in that way inherently, right? And so how do we do our best? I mean, we will make mistakes and we're going to stumble inherently in this, but how do we do our best in a situation to try and take a moment and listen to the land and the ancestors, and also the living descendants of that place's experience of life, right? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that part of what you're speaking to is how the land carries personal histories in it, but it's also very contemporary space. And so it's those spaces in between that we're all navigating, you especially.
And I think one of the most important things that I think about, you know, when I enter into a project like this or any kind of space, that I remind myself that I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's when you can listen. That's when you're open to learn. That's when you're in a state of wonder. Because in a state of wonder, you're open to more information, and then you can grow. But if you enter into a space like, no, I already know how this works. No, I already know what to do. No, I already know. Then you can't be respectful. You can't be in a state of reverence because you are not entering in humility. And I feel like, you know, I am also learning every day how to be more humble and how to be more reverent and how to be more silent and listening instead of speaking, and thinking I know more, thinking I know what's right, thinking I know I'm this, you know, tell me what I need to know because I don't know, you know? And I feel like in that space of not knowing, we can learn a whole lot.
Yeah, and I should mention too that we've been guided and humbled by the Lenape Center, who will, you know, welcome you openly into Lenape Hoking. So I just, before we open up, I have one more question, which is, I wanted to talk about the presence of figuration in contemporary sculpture, and how you and other peer artists who are working today, Caron Davis, Wangishi Mutu, Kiki Smith, Keon Williams, Huma Baba, are all engaging in vastly different ways with materials and scale and joy and trauma and expansiveness around the human form. Could you speak about that in your work as a starting point for your sculpture?
You know, I often think that the pieces have a job to do. You know, they have a job to do. And in a sense, they're no different than us. And I am only a tool in their becoming, right? And I think we all are, you know, all of us are listening in different ways and becoming the creators, the tool of their becoming in all different ways, in our own sort of sound and song and smell of what that looks like. But I've been really thinking about less about how I'm in control of this situation And these are my pieces and my babies and my work and my idea and my creation, and more of like, of who are you, and how did you, why are you here, what are you here to teach me, what are you here to teach us. And also when I let them go, I let go of where I want them to go, and I say, you know, you do what you're supposed to do, and I will trust, and I will be in a state of faith that wherever you end up is where you needed to go. And in that, I have to be put my I know everything aside, and listen and be and watch and see where did they go and what are they doing and who are they speaking to and why, right? And so I think that everything has consciousness, right? From a rock to a chair to a glass of water has different types of consciousness, and so does created objects that are called art, right? And they have their own agency. Each piece has its own agency and chose its parent, you know, like the ghosts of the pieces inside Karen Davis's work chose her to create them because she would do it the way that they needed to come into this world, right? And so I feel like, in a sense, I stay watching. I stay watching to see what happens. And also, I think that we resonate with the human form, and we find empathic responses to the human form. And so I think those beings want to come through in a human form to have more intimate access, in a sense, to our being, right? If it's more abstract, it may not have as much familial experience that figurative work might.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Clara, we can go to questions, other questions.
Great. Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Brooke. Again, I invite our audience to please type your questions into the Q&A, and I'll be happy to ask them on your behalf. One question I had, Rose, just to build off of this, you as the tool for these beings and these forms, is the role of drawing and planning as it meets maybe intuitive working. And, you know, I'd love to know if drawing plays a practice, what that looks like for you, and how that translates or changes as you move through each form.
That's so interesting, because like, where does that's such an interesting place where the intuitive meets the practical, in a sense, like even the analytical, like, you know, because I want so deeply for these works to have long lives, right? And they're inherently fragile. And so I've worked through my life to figure out ways to have them live longer, right? And be be stronger and more durable, but also be clear in their message, etc. What does that look like, right? And how does that come to be? And I was thinking the other day, you know, I'm making these works for the Cleveland Museum of Art right now, and I'm welding this like whole steel infrastructure right now, and then I'm going to build the bodies with concrete, which is pumice mixed with concrete, and then the heads and the bust is clay, because they'll be inside indoor pieces, and that matters. But I was thinking about how I often ask, like, what is the best way to make this message come to be, right? And so in a sense, I'm also listening, and I also have to do things that I've never done before, right? Like, I guess I gotta get really good at plasma cutting now. Like, I gotta get now I gotta do all these experiments with different materials, and I have to build new relationships with new materials, understand them, you know. And it's another thing that I've struggled to outsource my practice. Like, I need to have my hand into every part of it so that I fully understand its creation and its becoming, right? And that's super important for me. So I feel like building relationship with material, be it wood, you understand how it feels, how it moves, how it you can interact with it, metal, different materials, then you have a family of material that then you can talk to and you can ask and you build a relationship with, and they will come and help you when you need them, you know. And if you ask nicely, they might work with you well, right? You're like, can we work together with this, you know? Yeah.
Great. That sort of segues into a question that's come in online, which is this person writes, I find it thrilling to think about all the beings you've created and sent out into the world. Do you ever think in terms of their relationships to one another, their concurrent existence in the world? This person is thinking about beings they've encountered in San Francisco, New Mexico, Nevada, Dartmouth, upstate New York. Do you think about these connections and ongoing lives that they have?
I actually did a whole show about that at Jessica Silverman, where I created doubles of everything, which was I'd never done that before. And I made twins, you know, two of the same. And then I didn't let them go as a pair. They got to leave individually. And they were in relationship, you know, they were born together. They were created with the same intention. And then some of them left in two different directions. And they'll always have this like link to each other. And I always wonder about their link to each other and the sort of the string that gets stretched between them, but also their relationship with me. Like all these works that I make are all these sort of strings that are out there in the world. And I wonder about how we affect each other in a sense. Like the work they're doing affects me and the work that I'm doing affects them. And therefore, you know, the work that I made in 2014 that's in Denver is now still affecting me because of the work it's doing in Denver. And therefore, it will affect the work at Madison Square Park because we're all related, we're all family, we're all still in this big web that you sort of strum one part and the whole thing kind of vibrates. You know?
Mm-hmm. And we have another question building on this idea of family. This person writes, I'm a great admirer, not only of your work, but also your mother's. Are there ways in which you think about your work existing in relation to or not in relation to your mother's or other artists in your family?
I'm doing a show with my mom at the Norton Museum in March. It opens in March, so that's been pretty exciting to start collecting works and putting them together. And also to think about, you know, my own reverence to her practice and her brilliance. She's brilliant. And her sincerity, her courage that she built with her work. And then also to see the difference between my work and her work, and the importance of each of our voice, like what I'm trying to say, and sort of the vocabulary that I've built to express myself is somewhat different than the vocabulary she built, which is absolutely brilliant to communicate very certain things. And that because they're different vocabulary in a sense, I can have so much respect and admiration for what she does, right? And also that just, I couldn't be doing what I'm doing without that kind of foundation, an incredible foundation, you know. And I think the show at the Norton will really, you know, it'll have some of my grandma's work and my great grandma's work and even my great great grandma's work, right? And this, like, to really put me in context, because I don't exist in a vacuum, right? And there's this incredibly powerful and brilliant stones in this path of life, right? On this path of co-creating time. And I feel like, you know, I'm gonna be the stone and my daughter is gonna be the next one. How do we then be brave and audacious at times in the right way in order to create the type of world that we want for the next generations? And because of the brilliant work of my mom and grandma, you know, I'm able to sit here and be doing what I'm doing and be conscious of the relationships that I'm in. That's still going. It's a living thing. It's not back then. It's like right now.
And forging new conversations constantly every day, now and into
Oh,
the
yeah.
future too. Wonderful. I have one last question for you, Rose. Sorry, yes, this is another virtual question, and this is thinking about the Sentinels, I think, in your upcoming commission. And the question is, do you have any thoughts about these in relationships to totems, such as the Easter egg figures, or Easter Island figures, excuse me, or Stonehenge structures, or perhaps there are other reference that you have with the Sentinels?
One of my cousins saw a picture of counterculture, and they're we say, "Oh, Rose, you made Rosehenge." So they were calling it Rosehenge. There isn't like a direct reference to that, you know, and honestly, I didn't think about that until this moment. So that's obviously not a direct reference, but I don't, you know, I feel like if we have an inherent awareness of what a powerful space looks like, right? And that's not specific cultures, that's, I think, pan-human, and we know how standing together feels. We know how to create a space that delineates a moment of conscious awareness, or even the remembering of a sacredness of our life. And I think that has happened through time in all kinds of ways. And in a sense, like, artists are trying to figure out how to make those metaphors in this day, right? Like, you know, Huma Baba and Simone Lee are like creating those spaces and those experiences that send us to moments of a higher awareness, in a sense, right? And so we're all doing it in our different ways. So I feel like I hadn't considered that, but now I'm not going to forget it, and that's going to be interesting. The Sentinels were inspired by the space itself. So it was like, there's this park that is this moment of connection that's, even though it's manicured, it still smells like earth, and it still has the sound of birds. And in the metropolis, and the metropolis becomes these Sentinels, and so the Sentinels become these smaller versions of that, in a sense. And then the centerpiece is finding that peace in that space. And so it's almost like, it's always creating a metaphor of that place to make it clear what's happening there, and how also we can be more conscious of our relationship to the place itself, right? I don't know. So yeah, if it's that, I'm like, I want to try it out. Let's go put them up and try it.
Well, we're all so excited to see these installations. Congratulations, Rose, on this commission. Brooke, thank you so much for this dialogue tonight with Rose.
Thank you. Thank you, Clara, so much. And Rose, can't wait till next month when we install.
We got work to do.
We do. Time to get there.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Clara.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much.
Thanks.
Until next time.